pain.
It wasn't immediate, not the kind that knocks the wind out of you. Just a sharp, cruel sting radiating through my leg and side as I blinked up at the grand chandelier, the crystal prisms scattering light like shattered stars. My skirts were torn, my hair mussed, and yet, I was alive. I gasped, sitting up slowly, disbelief twisting my stomach into knots. The staircase behind me loomed ominous, as if it had been waiting to claim me, as it had in my last life. But this time, I wasn't going to let it win. Genevieve, a voice called softly, hesitating. My pulse jumped. I turned toward the source, the massive oak double doors of the estate's entrance. A man stood there, tall, lean, with the dusty uniform of a captain still clinging to his shoulders. His eyes were sharp, but there was a warmth buried beneath the wariness. Who are you?" I asked, trying to push myself to my feet. Pain lanced through my hip, and I winced. He moved closer, slow and deliberate, as if he sensed both my caution and my vulnerability. "Captain Alistair Black," he said, voice low but firm. "I've just returned from the front." I heard a scream. "Are you hurt?" I laughed softly, a sound more bitter than amused. "Hurt?" I echoed. "I should be dead. Thrown down these stairs by Thomas's children. The ones who wanted me gone." His eyes narrowed, dark and unreadable. "His children?" I shook my head, trying to gather the pieces of my scattered thoughts. "I know it sounds insane, but trust me, they're dangerous, and they will not hesitate to finish what they started." Alistair's jaw tightened. "You have my attention, and my protection if you'll allow it." "Protection?" I asked, my eyebrows rising. "I don't even know you. You just appeared." "I know enough," he said, his gaze scanning the house as if reading the hidden dangers behind the opulent walls. "Your story is credible, and I've seen enough blood in war to recognize when someone's life is in immediate danger." I blinked at him, uncertainty warring with relief. Something about him, the way he stood, calm but alert, ready to act, made me feel like the first moments of hope I'd had in months. I suppose I could use an ally," I admitted, biting my lip. He gave a faint nod, that subtle, commanding gesture that somehow made me feel safer than I had in this cold, treacherous mansion. "Good, because we're going to need a plan. These people are clever, ruthless, and willing to kill for what they think is theirs." I felt a shiver of anger, fear, and determination all at once. "Then we'll stop them. I won't let them take everything from me. Not my life, not my future, not this estate." Alistair stepped closer, lowering his voice, just above a whisper. "And I'll make sure you never have to face them alone." There was a flicker in his eyes, almost teasing, almost flirtatious, and my cheeks warmed despite the bruises forming along my sides. "You make a bold promise, Captain," I said, voice soft but firm. "I make bold promises only when I intend to keep them," he said, that dark, unwavering gaze settling on mine. And in that instant, I knew that this time, my fall would not end me. This time, I had an ally, a protector, someone I could trust. And if my intuition was right, someone who could also see the fire in me, the same fire that had made Thomas's children want me gone. I stood taller, brushing imaginary dust from my skirts. "Then let's begin," I said, determination threading through my voice. "Before they try to finish what they started." Alistair's lips quirked in the faintest smile, and I felt it, a spark of something dangerous, something thrilling, something unspoken. A promise that together, we could turn the tables and take back everything that was ours. The servants thought I was resting after my accident. They whispered behind closed doors, their voices carrying through the halls like the hiss of snakes. I lay in the guest chamber with lavender compresses on my bruises, but my mind was sharp, alert, burning. Alistair stood by the window, arms folded, scanning the gardens as if enemies might rise from the roses. "You don't trust anyone here, do you?" I asked quietly. He didn't turn. "Trust is a luxury I lost in the trenches," he said. "Your story confirms I was right to leave it behind. A soft knock came at the door. Before I could speak, Alistair stepped forward, opening it just enough to see the maid outside. "She needs more tea," the girl said, eyes lowered. I stiffened. Alistair glanced at me. I shook my head slightly. "No," he replied calmly. "I'll fetch it myself." The maid looked startled but bowed and left. When the door closed, my heart was racing. "They poisoned me with morning tea," I whispered. "Slowly. Every day." He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Then we stop you drinking anything you didn't prepare yourself. And what about the stairs?" I added bitterly. "That was their final attempt." His jaw tightened. "Then we learn everything about them." Quietly. That night, he accompanied me through the corridors under the pretense of checking the estate's ledgers. Candlelight trembled along the walls, and every shadow felt alive. "You're not afraid?" I asked. "I am," he said simply. "But I don't run from danger anymore." We paused outside the library when voices drifted through the door. "She's still alive," a woman said sharply. "Margaret, the eldest daughter." "She won't be for long," replied her brother Henry. "Father's health is declining. Once he's gone, she's inconvenient." My breath caught. Alistair leaned closer, whispering in my ear, "You are right." My hand trembled against his sleeve. "They're planning to kill him too." The door opened suddenly. We stepped back into shadow as Margaret emerged, her eyes sharp with calculation. They slid over me, still wrapped in my shawl, pretending weakness, then moved on. Only when she was gone did I breathe again. Later, back in my room, Alistair knelt beside me, his voice urgent but gentle. "We'll need proof. Letters, financial records, witnesses. And you must stop pretending to be harmless." I raised a brow. "Oh." He smiled faintly. "You have claws, Genevieve. I can see them now." My heart fluttered in spite of myself. "Careful, Captain. You're flirting." "Perhaps," he replied softly. "Or perhaps I'm admiring the woman who refuses to be erased." For the first time since my rebirth, I felt something close to anticipation instead of fear. This house no longer belonged to my enemies. It was about to become my battlefield. Morning arrived cloaked in deceit. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, painting the walls with delicate patterns that mocked the storm inside my chest. I sat at the vanity, staring at my reflection, pale, bruised, but very much alive. Alistair knocked softly. "Ready to meet your would-be murderers?" I lifted my chin. "Let's make them underestimate me." We joined the family for breakfast in the grand dining room. Sir Thomas sat at the head of the table, coughing faintly, his once commanding presence reduced to a frail shadow. Margaret poured tea with hands steady enough to fool anyone who didn't know what I knew. She offered me a cup. "Thank you, dear sister," she said sweetly. I accepted it, smiled, and didn't drink. "You look better today," Henry remarked, studying me like prey. "I feel reborn," I answered lightly. Alistair cleared his throat. "Father," he said, turning to Sir Thomas, "may I review the household accounts? The estate is in disarray after the war." Sir Thomas waved weakly. "Of course, my boy. Take what you need." Margaret stiffened, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Later, in the study, Alistair spread papers across the desk. "There," he whispered. "Funds disappearing. Medical payments to unknown doctors. Your poison." I exhaled slowly. They were killing me and him at the same time. "And planning to inherit everything," he added. A maid entered unexpectedly. My heart lurched until Alistair smoothly blocked her view of the desk. "We're busy," he said coolly. That afternoon, I returned to the garden where I had first awakened, kneeling among the roses as if admiring them. But my eyes were on the gardener, who avoided my gaze. "You were ordered to mix something into the tea, weren't you?" I asked softly. His hands trembled. "Miss, I won't blame you," I whispered. "But they will kill you too when they're finished." Tears welled in his eyes. They said I'd be ruined if I didn't. That night, I handed Alistair a vial. "This is what they used," I said. "Now we expose them." He closed his fingers around it. They don't stand a chance. And for the first time, I believed him. The wind howled through the estate that night, rattling the windows like restless ghosts. I couldn't sleep. Every shadow looked like a falling body, every creak like the echo of my own bones hitting marble. A soft knock sounded at my door. "Genevieve," Alistair said quietly. "May I come in?" I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders. "Please." He stepped inside, uniform jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, looking far more soldier than nobleman. His eyes flicked to the bruise on my arm. "They did this to you," he said, voice low. "I survived," I replied. "But you shouldn't have had to." The words landed somewhere deep inside me, tender and unfamiliar. No one had ever said that to me before. He placed the vial on my bedside table. I had it analyzed. "It's a slow poison, erodes the heart over weeks. They were making your death look natural." My fingers curled into the sheets. They wanted me weak, dependent, and dead. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. "I left this family to escape their cruelty," he continued. "When I came back from the war, I thought I could fix things. I was wrong." I met his gaze. "You're here now." A faint smile touched his lips. "For you." My heart stumbled. We worked through the night. He taught me how to read ledgers, how to spot forged signatures. When my eyes blurred, he slid a cup of tea toward me, his own, freshly brewed. "Safe," he said, watching me drink first. Our fingers brushed. I felt it, not fireworks, not madness, but something steadier. "Trust." "You don't look at me like I'm fragile," I murmured. "I look at you like you're formidable," he replied. By dawn, we had pieced together everything. The children stealing from their father, bribing doctors, planning my death. "They won't stop," I said. "Then neither will we." Before he left, he hesitated at the door. "Genevieve, when this is over, you won't be alone again." "I swear it." I believed him, and that terrified me more than any poison. By morning the estate looked deceptively peaceful, sunlight spilling across carpets that had once been stained with my blood. I stood in front of the mirror, fastening the pearl brooch Sir Thomas had gifted me on the day of my arrival, the same brooch his daughter had once sneered at, saying it looked like a widow's ornament. Today, I intended to wear it like armor. Alistair waited in the corridor, pretending to examine a faded portrait while keeping an eye on both staircases. "They'll be watching," he said quietly as I approached. "Let them," I replied. "Fear is more useful when it's fed." His eyebrow lifted, half impressed, half worried. "I don't like leaving you alone in that dining room." "I won't be alone," I said. "They'll be there, and I'll be ready." Breakfast was a performance. Sir Thomas sat at the head of the table, pale and distracted, while his children, Eleanor and Richard, murmured politely, their eyes sharp as knives. "You seem brighter today, Genevieve," Eleanor said sweetly. "No dizziness?" "None at all," I answered, lifting my teacup. "In fact, I've decided to take a greater interest in the estate's affairs." Richard choked slightly on his bread. "How admirable," he said. "Though surely that's unnecessary. Father has managed just fine." Sir Thomas coughed weakly. "I wouldn't mind the help, actually." Their smiles froze. After breakfast, I followed Richard into the study under the pretense of returning a ledger. Alistair lingered in the hall, pretending not to listen. "Richard," I said softly, closing the door behind us. "You've been under such stress lately. I worry." He stiffened. "What are you implying?" "I know about the missing silver shipments," I continued. "The forged receipts. The doctor you bribed to exaggerate my frailty." Color drained from his face. "You're mistaken." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Confess to me now, and I will beg your father to spare you." He laughed, brittle. "You think he'll believe a girl who tripped down the stairs?" The door opened suddenly. Alistair stood there, holding a folded letter. He might believe this. Richard turned slowly. Alistair placed the letter on the desk. "Your handwriting. An agreement with the apothecary. Payment in exchange for administering subtle heart-weakening agents." I watched the arrogance drain from Richard like water from a cracked cup. You went through my things, he hissed. No, Alistair replied calmly. You sent this to the wrong address. Silence thundered. Footsteps approached. Eleanor, drawn by raised voices. She stopped short at the doorway, eyes darting between us. What is this? She demanded. I met her gaze. The truth. She recovered quickly. This is a setup. They're conspiring against us. Alistair folded his arms. Then explain why you paid the house steward to alter the will drafts. Her lips parted, then pressed together. Sir Thomas's weak but furious voice cut through the corridor. Explain what, Eleanor? He stood there, leaning heavily on his cane, eyes blazing with a clarity I had never seen before. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Richard dropped into the chair. Father, it wasn't supposed to go this far. The confession spilled out in fragments. Debts, fear of losing the estate, resentment toward me for existing. I did not feel triumph. I felt hollow. Eleanor fled the room in tears, but Richard stayed, shoulders bowed as Sir Thomas listened in stunned silence. Later, in the quiet that followed, Alistair and I stood together in the garden. You were magnificent, he said. I was terrified, I admitted. He smiled faintly. Bravery is just fear that learned to stand upright. I laughed despite myself. You always speak like a poet pretending to be a soldier. And you, he replied gently, are no one's victim anymore. The words wrapped around me like a promise, fragile, powerful, and dangerously hopeful. The estate changed its breathing after that morning. Where once the corridors whispered with secrets, now they held their breath. Servants avoided Eleanor and Richard's rooms. Sir Thomas locked himself away with lawyers. And I, for the first time since crossing this cursed threshold, felt the house listening to me rather than hunting me. I found Alistair in the East Wing library, sleeves rolled, dust smearing his uniform as he pulled ledgers from forgotten shelves. You look like you're planning a war, I said. He smiled without looking up. I was born in one. I leaned against the desk. You don't have to do this alone. He paused, finally meeting my eyes. That's what frightens me most. Before I could ask what he meant, Sir Thomas summoned us both. His study smelled of old paper and regret. He looked years older than yesterday. I have rewritten my will, he said hoarsely. Effective immediately. Genevieve will manage the estate's daily affairs. Alistair will oversee all financial audits. Eleanor's shrill protest echoed from the hall, but Sir Thomas silenced her with a single raised hand. You nearly murdered your stepmother, he said, voice shaking. You will answer for it. After the meeting, I felt as though I had swallowed a thunderstorm. Alistair walked beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him through layers of silk and wool. You're trembling, he murmured. So are you, I replied. We stopped at the garden archway, where climbing roses hit us from curious eyes. You could walk away, I said quietly. This is not your family's mess anymore. You returned from war seeking peace, not scandal. I returned because this place was rotting, he said. And because you were here. The words slipped out before he could stop them. A flush crept up his neck. That came out wrong. No, I whispered. It came out honest. He exhaled, long and unguarded. You looked so small when I first saw you at the foot of those stairs. But now you command rooms without raising your voice. I command them because you stand behind me. Our eyes locked. The space between us was heavy, uncharted. I will protect you, he said finally. Even from yourself, if necessary. Then stay, I answered. Not as a black sheep. As my equal. A knock shattered the moment. A messenger delivered a sealed letter, the apothecary's formal confession. That night, the house erupted. Eleanor attempted to flee with jewelry stuffed into a valise. Richard tried to bribe the head butler. By dawn, both were under guard. I stood at the landing where I had once fallen, watching soldiers escort them out. Eleanor glared at me. You won't last a season. Alistair stepped forward. She already has. Later, when the gates closed behind them, silence settled like fresh snow. You should sleep, he said gently. I'm afraid to, I admitted. What if I wake up at the bottom of the stairs again? He hesitated, then offered his hand. Then sleep somewhere safe. I took it. He led me to the small sitting room beside his chambers, modest, warm, nothing like the grand rooms that had once imprisoned me. As I settled on the sofa, he brought a blanket and draped it over my shoulders with almost reverent care. Alistair, I said softly. Yes. If I had never fallen, you would never have risen, he finished. We smiled. Not as conspirators, but as something gentler, more dangerous.
Trust.
The first true night of peace felt wrong. The estate was quiet in the way a battlefield is quiet after the cannon stop, not healed, merely stunned. I slept in Alistair's sitting room, the sofa angled toward the hearth. I woke before dawn, heart racing, convinced I had heard footsteps on the stairs. But it was only rain against the windows. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself and padded barefoot to the door that separated his room from mine. It was closed, yet the presence behind it steadied me. Still alive, I whispered to my reflection in the glass. At breakfast, the servant's eyes followed me not with pity, but curiosity. Fear had changed direction. Alistair poured tea for me before I could reach the pot. You're thinking again, he said. When am I not? Fair, he replied. Sir Thomas requested my presence by mid-morning. The doctors had forbidden him excitement, which was ironic, considering his children were about to be charged with attempted murder. His voice trembled. I raised monsters. You raised heirs, I said carefully. They became monsters on their own. He winced, then reached for my hand. I was blind, but I am not blind now. The legal proceedings moved faster than expected. Testimonies from servants poured in about the loose banister, the forced tea, the whispered threats in corridors I had once walked in naive silence. I was asked to testify. The courtroom smelled of varnish and fear. Eleanor refused to look at me. Richard stared as if he had never seen me before. When I arrived at the estate, I began, voice trembling despite my resolve. I believed marriage would protect me. I was wrong. The judge asked me to recount the fall. I inhaled. I felt hands at my back. I heard laughter. A murmur rippled through the room. Afterward, Alistair found me in the empty gallery, gripping the railing until my knuckles burned. You did brilliantly, he said. I felt 12 years old again. He leaned closer, his voice low. You were not a victim today. You were a witness. The verdict came by evening.
Guilty.
Eleanor screamed. Richard collapsed into sobs. I watched, detached, until the doors closed behind them. Outside, rain soaked the courthouse steps. I didn't move. Alistair draped his coat around my shoulders. It's over. No, I said. It's beginning. Back at the estate, Sir Thomas suffered a fainting spell. The doctor insisted on bed rest. The household, now stripped of its predators, waited for instructions. They looked to me. I want light in every hall, I said. Open windows. Air the rooms that have been closed for decades. Yes, Lady Genevieve, they replied in unison. The title felt strange, but not wrong. That night, I found Alistair in the garden, sitting beneath the oak where the war memorial stood. Moonlight traced the scar across his face, making him look carved rather than broken. You never speak about it, I said. The war? The scar. The things people whisper. He tapped the stone beside him, inviting me to sit. They called me the black sheep long before the war, he said. Because I refused to inherit blood money. Because I chose battlefields over boardrooms. And when I returned with this, he gestured to his face. They finally had a reason. I reached out without thinking and brushed my fingers lightly along the edge of the scar. They were blind, I whispered. He closed his eyes. Genevieve, don't. Why? Because if you keep looking at me like that, I will forget every promise I made to myself about restraint. I swallowed. What promises? To not need anyone again. The silence between us felt alive. You don't need me, I said. But I need you. His eyes opened. Soft, vulnerable. That is far more dangerous, he replied. The wind rustled the oak leaves like distant applause. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel alone in the dark. The doctor said Sir Thomas might not see another winter. The news did not make me cry. It made me determined. The estate had been a mausoleum long before death ever touched its halls. It wore sorrow like velvet, heavy, suffocating, unearned. I walked its corridors the next morning with a ledger tucked under my arm, marking rooms not as his, but as ours. "Why are you smiling like that?" Alistair asked, watching me direct 3 servants to haul curtains from the east wing. "Because this place is about to revolt," I said. "Against what?" "Misery." He laughed, a real laugh, startled from somewhere beneath armor I had only just begun to understand. Sir Thomas asked to see me at noon. His skin was gray, but his mind was clear. "I hear you're reorganizing my funeral before I'm even gone," he said weakly. "I'm reorganizing your legacy," I replied. "They're not the same thing." He studied me. "You've changed. So has the house." He motioned for me to sit. "When I die, everything goes to you and Alistair. Equally." My heart stuttered. "The lawyers are already instructed." I wanted to object, to be humble. Instead, I felt rightful. "I will not let it rot," I promised. "I know," he said. "That is why I chose you." Later that afternoon, I found Alistair in the empty ballroom, sunlight spilling through freshly uncovered windows. Dust motes swirled like gold. "They're tearing down the West Gallery tomorrow," he said. "Good," I replied. "It's haunted. By ghosts or memories?" "Both." He leaned against the wall, watching me write in my ledger. "You've turned into a general. I had an excellent teacher." He raised a brow. "Did I teach you that?" "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "You reminded me I was allowed to fight back." We worked late. Plans piled atop the piano. Sketches for schools, a veterans wing, a hospital room that looked more like a bedroom than a ward. At dusk, exhaustion stole the sharpness from his posture. I brought him tea. "Careful," he murmured. "People will talk." "Let them," I said. "They've been talking my entire life." He held the cup, but didn't drink. "Do you trust me, Genevieve?" "With my life." "That isn't what I asked." I hesitated. "With my heart," I said softly. The world paused. He set the cup aside and stood, too close now to pretend nothing had shifted. His hand hovered near mine, not touching. "If I cross that line," he said, "there is no retreat for me." "I don't want retreat," I whispered. So he kissed me. Not the way men in novels did, not claiming, not consuming, but like a vow made without words. His forehead touched mine afterward, breath uneven. "I waited too long," he said. "You waited exactly long enough." When Sir Thomas passed 2 weeks later, it was quietly, with his daughter-in-law holding his hand and his estranged son standing in the doorway like a guardian rather than a shadow. The will was read. The estate, the trusts, the future. All to Genevieve and Captain Alistair Black. As the mourners left, the house exhaled. That night, we stood together on the grand staircase, the very place I had once been pushed. "Do you think it remembers?" I asked. "I think it chose you," he replied. "And you." He took my hand. I followed. The house was no longer dark. It was alive. And so were we. 10 years later, the grand staircase no longer frightened me. Children ran down it now, their laughter echoing against walls that once swallowed screams. The estate had become something unrecognizable, and yet, for the first time, honest. I stood in the entrance hall with a basket of ribbons in my arms, watching the village girls hang paper lanterns along the banister. "Careful," I called. "If you fall, my husband will draft military law." Alistair appeared behind me, hands sliding around my waist. "I heard that," he said. "And I absolutely would." "You've grown soft," I teased. "Only where you're concerned." The Blackwood estate, once a monument to greed, now housed a school, a war veterans' home, and a free clinic funded by the trusts we had redirected. People said the house had been cursed.
They now called it blessed.
The ceremony was small, though it could have been grand. We had chosen the oak tree instead of a cathedral, the same oak where I had once traced the scar on his face and learned the weight of his silence. I used to think happiness was loud, I told him as the guests took their seats. Trumpets, fireworks, applause. And now, he asked, now I think it sounds like this. I gestured to the breeze rustling the leaves. Like breathing. When the vows were done and the last guest drifted away, we remained beneath the oak, hands entwined, no audience left to perform for. You know, Alistair said, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek, this place tried to kill you. And you saved me. I didn't, he corrected. You saved yourself. I only stood in front of the blade. I looked up at the man who had once called himself broken. The war hero who had hidden behind a scar. The stranger who had become my home. Promise me something, I said. Anything. Never let this house forget what it once was. Not out of bitterness, but out of gratitude. He kissed my knuckles. Then promise me you'll never walk these halls alone again. I promise. We climbed the staircase slowly, deliberately, not as ghosts of a tragedy, but as its authors. At the top, he stopped me. What now, Lady Black? I smiled. Now we live. He leaned in and kissed me. Not careful, not restrained, but full, certain, forever. And the house at last knew peace.